Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so this is where we've come up to. So we are now asking the question, once, as the line before tells us, once we understand that Rabbi Yehuda Nossi is not understanding that the man gets tested via the extra vav in the verse, that how Rabbi Akiva derives it, the
Mhm.
Gemara then asks, the Rebbe, what about Rabbi Yehuda Nossi? Because how does he derive the principle? He's
Right.
agreed that the paramour will get tested, but how does he know? From where does he understand it? So
Hmm.
the Gemara asks Rabbi Yehuda, where does he derive it?
Hmm.
Right? How does he derive this understanding? Um, so the Gemara then continues and says, "V'nofkele midatanya." He will learn it from what was taught
Oh.
from another text that we don't see at this point.
Hmm.
With this new text teaching, not text of the Chumash, but this new teaching based on the same scriptural texts that we've been working through,
Hmm.
the 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 um, we have a brisa, which is a a a a a, a teaching that was taught in the yeshivas, but wasn't included as part of the Mishnah, but
Hmm.
part of some other context called the brisa, the other teachings concerning this topic. And now the Gemara will quote that brisa, and which will then give us an indicator how Rabbi Yehuda Nossi learnt it. We're starting. The verse says, in the whole passage, verse, scriptural text about the woman Sotah, it says, "Letzova habeten," that in the process of testing her, what's going to happen, the Brisa says, it says that the belly will swell, and
Right.
v'nofel yerach, and her thigh will fall away, meaning that she will feel, first the effects of the testing water via her belly, and then her thigh. That's the verse. The expounding that verse, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi's text of the Brisa says, that's referring to the belly and the thigh of the
Um,
paramour. That refers to that he himself will be affected.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So um, the Brisa then questions itself and says, is that the case? Do you say that the intention of this verse is the belly and the thigh of the paramour? Perhaps it's really referring to the belly and the thigh of the adulteress, of the
Yeah.
lady.
Yeah.
So how do we know what it refers to? As when the verse continues and it says, and her belly shall swell, and her thighs shall shall fall away. So if you just go back a little bit, you'll see that Hebrew verse is Chof Beis, verse number 22.
Uh-huh.
Then there's a repetition of the events of what's going to happen in verse 27,
Yes.
and it clearly says her, right?
Right.
We
Right.
know that this is a reference to her, but we also have a repetition within the text, okay?
Hmm. Hmm.
So then we can ask the question, why do we have the repetition of the text? It must mean that this has to refer, the first verse in 22 must be
Yep.
referring to the paramour.
Yep.
Therefore, I can see, right, that the paramour is indicated and he's going to be tested as well.
Got it. Yeah.
So we have therefore answered the question on Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi about from where does he know? that this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're happy with that.
Yep.
So in reference, we've
Yeah.
got this brisa. This brisa has taught us that the verse in 27, the verse in 22, after clearly referring in 27 to the adulteress, must refer to somebody, and it must be him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
then, but that sets up, the Gemara then sets us up for a further question. But if that is the circumstance of the understanding of the verses, then we've got a question that has to be addressed back to Rabbi Akiva. Why do you need it? Why do you need to understand that he's going to get tested from the extra vav? Surely you must accept the verse as Rebbi has understood it, and therefore there's an extra superfluity.
Mm-hmm.
You with me?
I'm here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So as he says in his text, how does the other Tana, Rabbi Akiva, interpret the repetition of the verses? The former verse indicates that the priest informs her that her belly will be infected first,
Right. Right.
and then her thigh, so as not to cast aspersions on the bitter water. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, now, I don't accept Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi's interpretation as just explained, but the verse 22 is not an indicator on the paramour, but really what's happening is the priest is telling her that her belly will be affected first and then her thigh. And why does she need to be told that? So as not to cast aspersions on the effect of the bitter waters. But its purpose is not to come to include the purpose of informing the the paramour, the adulterer for
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just read a little bit more in his text as he's written there. Right? That so in understanding Rabbi Akiva, right? We'll go back up where
Yeah.
you cursor
Yeah.
to this. Huh?
Yeah.
The reason people might claim that the priest says to the woman, "The Lord will make you a curse and an oath amongst the other people," when the Lord makes your thought fall away and your verse building, which is a previous verse. This um, um, so this interpretation is just an intro to the next section. But I'm just going back to the idea that we were presenting, that Rabbi Akiva has told us that although the brisa has suggested that the Rebbe's interpretation that the verse refers to the thigh of the adulterer.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Rabbi Akiva says that the verse in 22 is really a reference to tell her that the waters will affect her, and she needs to be reminded of that and being appalled about, because we don't want other people to say or the onlookers to say that the woman's death was not due to the bitter water, but rather to some other cause that might have been floating around her.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we understand Rabbi Akiva's objection to the brisa and
Mm-hmm.
why he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
learn like Rebbi,
Mm-hmm.
and that is now understood. So now the text of the Talmud wants to set us up for the next statement of the Talmud.
Yeah.
Right? So and that means that we have to ask Rebbi, well, why don't you accept Rabbi Akiva's interpretation of the
Yeah.
verse?
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Okay.
You've gone, uh, and let's just read the intro that it had over here, right? So um, the verse in 21,
Hmm.
right? So the Lord will make. So he said that the Lord will make you the curse and your people, and the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your belly swell. This seems to imply that her thigh is supposed to be affected before her belly. Therefore, when her belly swells first, as you see, the mention over there, um, the therefore um, when her belly swells first, as what will happen, people might conclude that it is not due to the water,
Hmm.
and it is for this reason that the priest um, needs to inform her that her belly will swell first.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
he lets her know the order. He's telling her the order in which these things will happen.
so
That's the
um,
new element.
so what Rabbi Akiva is addressing over here, right, in his answer, is that verse 21 and verse 22, the order is different.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Okay, before we get to the next little section, Rabbi Akiva has told told Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi prior to that, right, that the wording from verse 21 to 22 seems opposite. Let's just go review it and go back up a little bit, right? So you see in this quote, right, where um, we've got a little bit higher, right?
Yeah.
A little bit higher. So he says in
Yeah.
22 there, right?
Yeah. There it
You've
is.
got you've got belly to swell and the thigh to fall away. That's 22,
Right.
right? Again, 27 says belly shall swell and the thigh shall fall away.
Yep.
Same order.
Yep.
Let's go a little bit further now, a little bit further down, the further, that's where we're going, right? And we've got a reference to 21. Let's look at the quote of 21. The Lord will make you a curse and oath among your people. The Lord will make your thigh fall
Oh,
away
okay.
in your belly swell.
I
Different
see it.
order.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay. So potentially there's the implication that 21 and 22 are not in synchronization.
Hmm.
Therefore, it's possible that onlookers could 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 think that she's not being affected via the water,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because 21 and 22 say a different order.
Right.
Therefore, 22 comes to tell us that when as he says, where your cursor is, as he writes, therefore, when the body
Yeah.
swells, people
Yeah.
might conclude that it's not due to the water, and it's for this reason that the priest needs to inform her that the belly will swell first.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Very
Now
good.
we go back to Rabbi Huda Anossi and say, well, Rabbi Akiva has presented his circumstances strongly.
Hmm.
What about why won't you concur to Rabbi Akiva's approach? Okay, so we're in the text of 16, right? V'idach,
Hmm.
and the other person in the discussion,
Oh.
im kain lichtav kra, we've got an issue. Why don't you accept it? Okay, let's work with it. So why does the other Tana, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, disagree with
Uh-huh.
Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara now answers, because if it is so, the verse and the cause the body to swell and thigh to fall away, verse 22, is
Right.
referring to the woman. The verse
Right.
should have written her belly and her thigh. What
Right.
is meant by the phraseology belly and thigh? I conclude from this, referring to the belly of the thigh of the paramour,
Yeah. Yeah.
back to his original contention. You
Right.
might have thought that 21, 22 are all about the woman. Well, in fact, 21 is, he says, but 22 is about the paramour. Therefore, I don't need those extra bovin to
Yeah,
understand
I
that what's
see.
going to happen to
I
him,
see.
and I'm learning it out, and
Okay.
I'm learning it out of the text.
Okay.
Okay. So now we've understand the two opinions. Once we've understood the two opinions, the Gemara's now got a further issue that it wants to think about. So the Gemara then continues and says, "V'ema kula," perhaps the entire verse comes for this purpose, that is to indicate that the water evaluates the paramour as well, and does not teach the order of the punishment, and therefore, perhaps Rabbi Akiva, why don't you adopt Rabbi Yehuda Anossi's approach? The Gemara answers, if so, the Torah should have written his belly and his thigh. What is the meaning? What is the meaning of the general wording, the belly and the thigh? So conclude from this the idea that there are two conclusions. Rabbi Yehuda can understand that the paramour is potentially punished,
Yes.
and the priest informs the woman with regard to the order of the punishment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's intentionally so that it is written, verse 22 is written that way, because verse 22 doesn't specifically write a pronoun. If we just go up those lines, you'll see, no, just where you were before, sorry, right?
Yeah.
As he said, the Gemara answers, 3 lines down from where your cursor is at the moment, the Gemara answers, if so, the Torah should have written his belly and his thigh. What is the meaning of the general wording of 22, the belly and the thigh, without the pronoun? Mm-hmm. The idea that the Gemara is saying is in fact, there are 2 bits of data to be understood from this verse. That the paramour is punished according to Rebbi, and the priest is informing the woman with regard to the order of the punishment. So now we have an understanding that can, in some respects, fit in with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva. Mm-hmm. And that being the case, we can understand the import of the Gemara. Now, in the text of the Vilna Shas, at this point, you would have written, if you go down a little bit just from your screen, right? You would have written a double dots in the Hebrew text. And that, which then shows you that this is the end of the discussion at this point. I see. This is indicated by the Sparia with that squiggle over there, which is really telling you that this is a new paragraph.
Okay. Yeah.
And in the different formats of the different texts, we're just seeing the way Sparia has put it together.
I see. Yes.
This shows you that we've ended that discussion.
Okay.
The end of the discussion was Rabbi Akiva has learnt out his understanding. Rabbi Yehuda has learnt out his understanding that there's that the reference to the paramour really comes from that middle verse. And it's got 2 indicators in that verse. Rabbi Akiva will say, I learn out my rules via the extra letter vav to refer to refer to the three ideas of commandment, operation, and the conclusion of it, of what's going to happen, the execution and the information, right, via the three by the three repetition of the word u'ba'u, which that's how
Yes.
it started, and
Yes.
and its description in the verse and how it all how it's all put together.
Yes.
So in this section now, the next section starts a new section, and we'll discuss now another verse, another part of the verse, which is the description of the word nitma, which at our next meeting we will
Yes.
continue.
Very good.
So we've now ended off to the end of to the end of this section.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Okay, and we've got the grounding and the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda's approach.
Indeed. Very nice. Very nice.
So this is the top of the page of the bottom of 28, 27
Right.
B. And the Gemara initially started by saying the expression Esau, who does that refer to?
Right.
And then we said, well, while we're working it out, who does it refer to? It can't refer to the husband, because essentially, what has the husband done wrong? Why should he be tested?
Yeah.
And that's the flow of the Gemara.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the Gemara keeps on going and says, but really, we're testing her, and we're testing the sinner,
right,
being the paramour,
right.
But he is not being tested. Then the Gemara then continues. So if you move your cursor down to a little bit further, it says that you need to go further.
Okay.
You need to go to 20. You happen to be on the wrong page. You're still in 27. You need to go to 20, the top of 28.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay, so exactly there. Fine.
Yeah.
Just
okay.
So what has happened? You've advanced a little bit too further, right? But at the top of the page, what we say is that the verse is not really addressing the husband at this point, because the verse is really talking about the woman and the paramour, because and exactly where your cursor is at the moment, if he has committed a similar iniquity, right, the water evaluates his actions. That expression, that idea doesn't apply to the husband, because that is difficult. Why is that? Where he has committed a similar iniquity, does the water must evaluate her? But it isn't taught that the man, and here's the verse, the man shall be clear from iniquity, and the woman shall bear her iniquity. Verse 31.
Yes.
Right, which is right at the end of the passage of the Sotah, which then tells us, continuing reading the text that you've got there, the interpolated text, that indicates that only when the man, meaning the original husband, is clear of any iniquity, does the water processes actually start. Because if the husband is not of the appropriate status and of the appropriate level, it's only then that can the if he's is of the appropriate level, and it is, and when he has it, the expression in the verse is the spirit of jealousy. Now that doesn't rest on him, right? But what this idea of a spirit of jealousy doesn't mean a person being jealous of another person's good fortune, but that means his zealousness. We find the use of the word jealous translated in English, the kinna, expressed to the tzaddik of Pinchas, who in the narrative of the Bible, right,
Oh, yes.
inequity and he kills the princess. And,
Yes.
and we are told that he was zealous. It uses the same
Yeah.
Hebrew word, but
Okay.
the interpretation is that he was zealous on the part of God. This man who's taking his wife through the Sotah processes is also acting in a sense of zealousness,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps perhaps a little bit more than he should,
Mm-hmm.
because this process is not really approved of by the rabbis to do it. And that a person should really work out his marital issues
Oh,
together
I see.
in a proper in a different fashion. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if he's being truly zealous for godliness, and he's seen something inappropriate and he wants to do something about it, and after warning his wife and the wife not heeding for his warning, etc., he's gone through this processes.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Mm-hmm.
so, our sages suggest this isn't the best way to do things. Nevertheless, if he goes through this process, all of this would happen. But again, the Gemara is really is telling us from the beginning, if he's got any problem, if there's any issues with him, the husband,
Yeah.
the water procedure can't even start. And
Yes.
therefore she won't be evaluated, and other things, which again lends us to part of the ideas that the circumstances of the Jews and the spiritual levels which they were on at the times when these activities were still in the processes of happening were a very high spiritual level, and people didn't take it on the most base level that the way we read it. Notwithstanding that, we have to understand it as in its fullest measure.
Yeah.
But the husband has, is trying to go to be in a higher spiritual state, and he's asking, and he's dragging his wife along in this in this process. And again, as I mentioned before, where the rabbis have already, even at the time of the Mishna, had already disbanded this whole process